Alrighty, welcome back everybody to the third week of our web project development course being hosted here through the Elk Grove Village Public Library. It is the summer of 2022 and we've got a great program going on here involving computer science and computer programming, learning more about the fundamentals of web project development and building out our skills with the programming language of JavaScript. Today is the third week of this program. It is a 4-week program in totality. And today is the third week where we will be continuing to build our skills on the foundation we laid out in the past 2 weeks and building out our skills further today and last week coming up next week as well. As always, it is great to see a good number of people returning. We got some people who have been pretty consistent, so it's always nice to see. And activity in the Google Classroom has been nice too, and we'll do a quick recap of that if you need any help as well. So without any further ado, let's get things on the road. You guys already know who I am, guys. My name is Rayaan Siddiqi. I am now going to become a sophomore at the University of Illinois at Chicago, pursuing my bachelor's degree in computer science. Went to Conan High School here in the Schaumburg area, and about a year and a half ago, published a book called The Switch Up, which is available to be purchased on Amazon about a student's journey throughout the world of high school. Out of curiosity, anybody here read the book? You have that, okay. And I was at the Schaumburg Library just 2 days ago doing a presentation with a bunch of other students. I don't believe any of you guys were there, but talking to them about the book, the publishing process, and did a great author talk there, an author visit. So more events like that will be happening in the future if you guys want to come up through. Would love to see you guys in person as well. But you guys can follow me on my TikTok where I make much more technological related videos as well. Rayaan Siddiqi. But yeah, that is a quick intro about me, which you guys I feel like should be engraved in your mind by now. So let's get things on started with our agenda. This is how we roll with the classes, right? Do a quick recap of what we're going to accomplish and then make our way and plow our way through it, right? So first things first, do a quick housekeeping of make sure we're all on the same page. Then reviewing the last week's code concepts we introduced, doing a quick brush up on those, making sure we're all on the same page. Then introducing some new coding concepts, which will help us today. And then finally reviewing our project, reviewing the progress we made on our project, and then continuing to code and build it out even more so that we can have a finalized piece by next week. So let's get started with first thing first, a quick little recap of our Google Classroom. By now, I believe I've seen everybody's name registered in the Google Classroom. Anybody having any difficulty at this point, please do let me know. You can drop in the chat or unmute your mic, but I believe you're all registered. We all know how to utilize it, right? So if I go to the Google Classroom right here, we see we've got the classwork tab I can go to, and then I'm going to go to the summer 2022, enter the web development. And then here is a great number of resources, including our Zoom link, the last year's recorded sessions, along with our weekly recap. So if you go to the weekly recap, you can see the code link for that day, along with the YouTube video. So if you ever missed a link or missed a class, you want to go back and review some material, just open up the link, open up the coding link, and you can follow along right away. That's what we did last week as well. We got the coding link, that's with the project which we're working on, along with the YouTube video, which is a recording of our session. So these are really helpful if you want to go back and review any content. They're a great resource. Alrighty. So if there's already questions, please let me know. But I believe at this point we're all signed up, and it's a great way for us to communicate. I can make messages. You guys can message me back as well. It's a good way to communicate between us and myself. Alrighty, cool. Just answering some messages in the chat. Yep, and that's fine, no worries. Okay. All right, cool. So now let's get towards talking about the coding concepts which we've been reviewing for the past 2 weeks. We started off the first week super light and easy, just getting introduced to what is JavaScript, what is web development. And last week we slowly progressed into more of an intermediate type role, right? Where we started to learn more about coding concepts and started to make our project, which we'll talk about more later today. So what I want to do is first review those concepts, make sure we're all on the same page, make sure our foundation of coding is all really solid so we can advance pretty nicely. So the first concept which I want to review is from week 1. We talked about 2 main concepts, those being variables and buttons in HTML. Now, without me doing in-depth explanation, who can give a class a quick reminder of what is a variable in a couple minutes? Who can do that? Are you saying it's like a box? It sorts, it holds information. Yes, bing, bing, exactly. It's like a box. And one of the main things, guys, we talked about is making an analogy, right? To what is the coding concept? What can be related to an item in real life? And that's exactly what I just did right there. A variable is like a box. It holds data. And that data can be, anybody have any remember? What data can it hold? Maha saying numbers and words. Exactly, that is really true. Variables are able to hold numbers, words, booleans, a bunch of different data pieces, right? Alrighty, and without me getting further into HTML buttons, who can give us a quick recap? What is a button's purpose? Like, what is it? Obviously, it's a button, right? You click it, but what's the purpose of a button? Are you saying when the button is pressed, it executes a task? That is 100% true. When you click a button, it's like an action task, right? It's supposed to do something, call a function, something we'll review a little bit more, but it's supposed to execute some piece of code. That is exactly right. So you guys hit the nail on the head, guys. Variable is a container for data. We're able to store data. At this point, it should become pretty repetitive, right? Numbers, strings. The first line of this right here says, let the variable x hold the number 5. I know the past couple of weeks has done a great job. What are these last two ones saying? Last two lines?
Variable y is equivalent to x, and the variable z is equal to x plus y. So
Exactly.
the variable z is equivalent to 5 plus 6. So that means z is 11.
Like clockwork. Exactly. Great job, Ayush. That's exactly what we're doing, right? You can read every line of code like it's an English statement. And that's exactly what Ayush has showed us right there. And we know by now that variables are AKA containers. They hold data. Now, buttons, you guys also hit the nail on the head. They're like an action call, right? When you click them, they're supposed to be an action called. And earlier today, we were talking about how buttons are sort of responsible, right, for calling some pieces of code. They're what essentially going to call our JavaScript because our HTML is holding the button. But all the code, which is actually going to run, like the brains of the operation, right, we call it, is the JavaScript. So when we click the button, it's supposed to call some pieces of JavaScript. And that some pieces is something we discussed in our coding concepts in week 2. So let's review those. Functions is a pretty close correlation as to what I was just talking about. Anybody want to give a quick recap? Any thoughts to remember? This might be a bit more new concept, so no pressure, but any thoughts you guys have of what is a function? Maha saying it's like a big container for code we write. 100% agree. Functions are like a big weak analogy. And you remember what the analogy was from last week? What is a function like in real life? Well, just to give you guys a quick recap, a function is like a house, right? We talked about it last week. If we go back, it's like a house in the sense that it houses a bunch of different functionality, right? A function has functionality. Like a house, there's bathrooms, there's bedrooms, there's living rooms, there's kitchens. All of that needs to be inside of a house, right? You wouldn't see a kitchen just outside in the blue, right? Outside in the grass, right? That would make much sense. So that likewise, a function is able to house all different pieces of code, whether that's variables, that's conditionals, a bunch of different things, right? So functions are responsible for holding all of that code. They make our code nice and abstract so that it's easier to read. And moreover, we're supposed to make sure that our functions are declared very specifically in the sense that what we name our functions should be unique. So say a function's purpose is to add a bunch of numbers. Who thinks will be a good, what will be a good name for that function? What would be a good name, guys? If our function's purpose is to do addition of a bunch of numbers, we want to make sure that our function name is actually representative of what's going on in that function. So what would be a good name for that function? In the chat saying hold sum of numbers, addition. Yeah, both are great names, Ayushma, that we want to make sure that when somebody's going to read our code, right, and looking at what it does, we want somebody to know that, hey, this function is responsible for adding a bunch of numbers. And that's exactly what we're going towards in our project as well. So that's great that we all know and are on the same page on what a function does. Main idea, hold code, make our lives easier, make it all organized. Now, the second concept is something really important we started to use last week and also introduced in our week 2, that being conditionals. Anybody remember anything from this concept?
It's an if statement. So if one condition occurs, execute the string of code.
Okay, like that. Ayush, can you provide any examples by chance? You want to like relate to real life?
Like one example you made in like the last class, that if a light is red, the car will halt. If it's green, then it will drive.
Exactly. Yep. So love that connection to real life, right? And a conditional is essentially, as a human, right? You do something if a certain condition is met, like Ayush was talking about, right? If the light is green, the car will go. If the light is red, the car will stop. And that's exactly what a conditional is in computer programming, guys. If a condition is met, then a certain piece of code will run. Otherwise, if a different condition is met, then that piece of code will run in the brackets, right? So if condition 1 is met, the code within these 2 brackets will run. Otherwise, if condition 2 is met, then the code between those two brackets will run. And then finally, if none of the conditions are met, then this else condition will run, and whatever code is inside of these else brackets will be running. So do these 2 concepts of functions and conditionals make sense to us? Because they're going to be something we're going to utilize more today, guys. And it's the main thing that we just got to know, that if a condition is met, we run a piece of code. Otherwise, you run a different piece of code. Does that make sense? Everything we covered today, guys? All of those coding concepts from the past 2 weeks? Already good. Avanish, Ayush, you guys are good too?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Alrighty, so now we've covered those 4 foundational level coding concepts. And this week, we're going to transition to a bit more intermediate, more advanced coding concept. And it's going to be very helpful and imperative when we're making and working on our project to a larger degree. Let me explain why. The coding concept for the day now is, guys, something called an array. Now, when you're looking at this image, right, what is it? It's a fruit basket. A fruit basket with a bunch of different fruit. We got bananas, we got oranges, we got apples right there with some peaches, pineapple, missing some mangoes though. Well, do love me some mangoes, right? So we got an array right here we're talking about, but what is an array in comparison to a fruit basket? Well, a fruit basket is able to hold a bunch of different fruit all in one area, right? You got a big basket, it's all holding a bunch of fruit in one area is the main key, right? It's not like a fruit basket is gonna spread out the fruit in a bunch of areas, right? The main purpose of a fruit basket is to hold all the fruit in one singular area. Likewise, an array is a container which is able to hold a bunch of different data pieces in one area. So let's think about that again. Fruit basket holds all the fruit in one area. So an array would hold all of what in one area? Anybody have an idea?
Code that like executes a similar task, like something that all code that like works on a certain part of our website or whatever we're making.
Yep. So I like the train of thought I use. So an array is responsible for holding all of similar types of data. So let's take a look what that actually means. So arrays, guys, are like a data structure that allows us to hold same type of data. I just said that right. But what does that actually mean? Well, arrays are responsible for holding whatever data is, but it has to be very similar data. Meaning that if I have an array, that array has to hold one type of data. It could be numbers, it could be words, it could be decimals, but it has to be one type of data. I cannot have mixing of data in the sense that an array cannot hold numbers, letters, words, a bunch of different data, right? Arrays are supposed to hold one similar pieces of data. Like we were talking about a fruit basket, right? Fruit basket holds a bunch of different fruit, but the fruit can be different. It could be mangoes, it could be apples, bananas, oranges. Likewise, in coding, a array could hold a bunch of different numbers. Those numbers do not have to be the same. It could be numbers 1 through 100,000. An array could hold all those numbers. But the main thing is that the array is holding one type of data, that type of data being numbers. So let's do a quick exercise right here and looking at what does an array look like in real coding. And one thing to remember is that, guys, arrays are like a list. They hold a bunch of different data for us. And that list starts out at the 0th index. So in like English, right? Like Ayush, what do you think? This first place, would I call it the first position or the 0th position? What do you think? Oh, no worries. So I'm saying, what do you think I would call this first position? Would it be the first position or the 0th position? How do you think the computer talks about that position as? The first item, right, in our list, pretend like all of these boxes are holding fruit. So this first box holding a fruit, that's actually called the 0th position in computer programming, right? So it's the 0th index. So when we have an array and we want to access that first fruit or whatever first item is, we have to refer to it as the 0th position. In reality, in English, right, we say this array has 10 items, 10 fruits, but it starts off at the 0th index. So that's something we talk about more. It might be a bit confusing right now to visualize, but think about it like this. We in English say this is the first box, but computers say that's the 0th box. So think about it like that, and it'll make arrays and the whole concept much easier. And now let's do a quick little exercise and see that we all know how arrays are working, right? So definition of an array we talked about is a data structure containing a number of data values, all of which are the same type. So is this first array valid, guys? This one holding all numbers, is it valid? Does it work? Yes, and Ayush, why does it work?
They're all integers.
Bing, 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 okay. The second one, second array, A, B, C, D, E. Is that array valid? Yes, and Ayush, the reason why again?
They're all letters.
Okay, exactly, yep. But this last array, we've got AB, number 1, 5.6, decimals, integers, words. What's going on here? Is that valid or not? And Ayush, the reason is?
It's a mix of different data values. They're not all the same.
Exactly, right? Main thing is they have to be the same type. So they all have to be numbers. They all have to be decimals. They all have to be words. But they cannot be intermixing, right? That is something you cannot do, right? So that is a important thing to remember about arrays. And that's going to be a concept which we're going to utilize today, which I'll talk about how, but keep this idea in the back of your mind, how arrays are able to hold and store a bunch of our data in one area. Now that data is going to be something specific we're going to talk about today, and hint, it's going to have to do with our project in the terms of our quiz game questions, which we're asking the users, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. Alrighty, so now let's get to talking about our project and how we'll utilize more of the coding concepts we've been talking about these past 3 weeks now in our project. A quick recap of the project which we've been doing, guys. It's a quiz game, right? 5 to 10 questions the user has to answer. We tell the user, hey, you got the question wrong, or hey, you got the question correct. Then we're gonna write some good code and display the user what their score is and make the whole project look nice. And moreover, in the parentheses, you guys can see the coding concepts which we're utilizing in this project. And now we've essentially learned all of the coding concepts required. That being, last week we talked about variables, conditionals, evaluating if the user got the answer right or wrong, making good code in the terms of organizing our code with functions, structurizing our whole game with the HTML, and then updating the user scores and storing all that information in a variable. Now, who thinks they have an idea of where we'll utilize arrays today with our project? Where will it be? And hint, it has to do with the idea of we're asking the user multiple questions. So where could we utilize an array? Anybody have an idea?
We can maybe use it to hold like all like the different types of questions and stuff.
Exactly, Ayush. That is a great idea, Maha, in the chat too. And with asking questions to the user, that is 100% true. And that's what we're going to do today, guys. That last week, we'll get there in a minute. So last week we did our HTML structure, create the function to handle the actions, and got the user response from the text box and are evaluating it using conditionals. Basically, we're asking the user one question, user answered it. We say you got it right or wrong, and we're telling them, hey, you got it right or wrong using if and else statements. But today is going to be more of the cool stuff involving that. We're going to utilize that concept of arrays and exactly like Ayush and Maha are talking about it. We're going to store all the questions in an array and we're going to evaluate them in a better way, which we'll talk about as well. Now, Ayush, you said storing the questions. Why can't we store the questions and not the questions and the score together?
Because maybe it's a good way to organize them, and there's less it's more tidy and stuff, so like there's less chances of the code to mess up and it'll be less work to fix it.
Definitely love that use of vocabulary, the word tidy. And that's exactly what arrays and functions help us do, right? They help us tidy up our code, make it organized, which is really important as we grow into better programmers. So today, we're going to utilize these new concepts and let's get to it. We're going to hop on, guys, to our coding website of jsfiddle.net. I will be dropping the link in the chat below if you'd like to hop on in. Otherwise, there's two recommendations I usually make. The first one being that if you want a split screen, have the Zoom open on one screen or on a different device, and then follow along with me. Otherwise, you can just follow along on my link and just see what I'm doing. However, I do believe that it is much more worthwhile for your time to be actually typing the code out so you get a better idea of how it all works out. So I'm dropping both links in the chat. You can choose whichever option you please. So they are both in the chat, and I'll wait. You've got a minute or two to hop on the website, and we'll get started.